I've seen some terrible guitars over the years, especially when I was still teaching private guitar lessons. The amount of horror I saw was not something you wish upon your very enemy. From just horrible sounding blocks of wood to downright unplayable guitars that you wonder how on earth someone could produce something like that. 20 years ago I had to settle with this, my first acoustic guitar, which wasn't particularly well built and didn't sound all that great, to be honest. And now I think of it, it was nowhere near as cheap as these four. But how is it nowadays? Are cheap guitars better? Are they good enough? Let's find out. So here are four often seen popular, budget, affordable guitars that I will put through a series of tests to find out how bad they actually are. I think the most important thing for beginners is playability and sound. And probably even in that order. So let's comment on the playability later. Let's first do a direct comparison between the four contenders. The Fender CD-60, one of the top-selling budget guitars often seen in the hands of beginners. A dreadnought in natural finish. Not the first time I've seen that. Does this instrument deserve to wear the name Fender on its headstock? Contender number 2, here we have another giant, the Yamaha F310NT. By the looks of it, it's not that much of a difference between the previous one, but is this a little brother or the big brother? Does this guitar from that gigantic Japanese company have a place in the beginner market? Contender number 3, the Harley Benton HB Custom Line CLD 10S NSGs. Can you give normal names to these guitars? This guitar is a Chinese-made baby child of the German guitar store Thomann and supposedly offers good quality guitars for a reasonable price. Contender number 4, something totally different but nevertheless an interesting one. The Orangewood Rey. Is there a place for this brand when talking about budget guitars, or is it just a copy of what's been around for ages? Also, this guitar has a slightly smaller waist and has a cutaway, unlike the other three. Interesting, and by the way, it's only available in North America. So a word about these contenders. When your guitar or the guitar you're checking out isn't here, it might be worthwhile checking out this video anyway. The way I test these guitars would be the same as when I walk into a guitar store and check out different guitars. So when picking these particular guitars, I browsed multiple web shops to find popular models. I found 5, I emailed the manufacturers if they would provide me with a review unit, and these 4 were cool enough to do it, which is awesome. So thanks. When asking for the guitars, I also said I would be giving these away to local schools of music for educational purposes, which I'll do at the end of this video. So, back to the test. When playing these cheaper guitars, the playability and setup is something I'm always very skeptical or even worried about. I've seen the worst things. Beginner guitarists have trouble enough getting that darn C major chord down, so making it even harder by trying it on a bad guitar is just a form of sadism in my book. So here's a little spoiler for you all. When we look at these 4 guitars, luckily we don't see any shocking things. Right out of the factory, these are all playable. But there are some very interesting differences. When talking about sheer playability, it's a tie between the Yamaha and the Harley Benton. Where if I have to choose, the favor might slightly tip towards the Harley Benton. It's a tad lighter to fret around the entire neck, maybe even a little too light, which can cause problems, so we'll get into that later. The Orangewood is just good, and the Fender is coming in at a decent 4th. It's a little harder to fret down at the nut. And I think this has to do with the string slots being too conservatively cut out. So this is easily fixed, of course, but this brings me to a very important point. Can you expect from a beginner to do maintenance or even serious adjustments on a guitar just above 100 euros? Bringing it to a luthier can cost like half of it, which, if the guitar will last 5 to 10 years, probably is a good investment. But really, I don't think it's realistic to expect it from the average novice or beginner guitar player. So judging these guitars by how they roll out of the factory is probably a fair approach. The action of all 4 guitars fall well within spec of what's desirable. A little shy of 3 mm measured at the 12th fret of the low E string, and around 2 mm at the high E. The Orangewood thinnest strings falls a little bit above 2 mm, which isn't really noticeable when playing, and the Harley Benton is on the low side, which is a good and a bad thing. This explains why this Harley Benton guitar plays a little lighter than the competition. But it also has a negative impact on the tone, because there is some slight string buzzing going on in the upper registers. Okay, so it's not much really, it's just barely, but it's definitely there on some spots of the B string especially. So it's always a compromise of getting the action low, ensuring a good playability, but on the other hand, it shouldn't have any negative impact on the tone. Luckily, we don't have to make any adjustments to the neck. All 4 have a slight bow or relief, well within spec. So far, so good. Let's do some more tone tests. So let's take a look at the workmanship, the hardware and the woods. Most guitars at this price point will probably have laminated woods, meaning that there's like multiple layers of wood or veneer glued on top of each other. And you can see that by peeking through the sound hole, and if it looks kind of weird, a little rough, it's probably gonna be laminated. If it looks nice and curvy and smooth and you're gonna see the grain from the top going all the way through the bottom, it's probably a solid top. The Orangewood is layered mahogany top, back and sides. The Fender and the Yamaha both have a laminated spruce top, but here the Fender packs mahogany back and sides, just like the Orangewood, where the Yamaha has Meranti back and sides. And lastly, to my big surprise, the Harley Benton has a solid spruce top, which is surprising for a guitar under 150 euros. But is it just a fancy feature to make it sell, or does it really make a difference? Before we move on, here is a brief message from today's sponsor. It's my guitar course. So if you're a beginner or a novice guitar player, or maybe feel like you've skipped some of the fundamentals of learning guitar, I'd love for you to take a look at my guitar course Learn, Practice, Play. It's a carefully designed roadmap to take everyone to the next level of playing guitar, going through 7 core modules with over 55 in-depth videos, including workbooks, tabs, downloadable backing tracks, chord sheets and more, teaching you everything you need to know to become a great all-round guitar player. Check it out at learnpracticeplay.com. And now, back to these babies. When looking at the finish, the Fender really outshines the other 3, literally. The finish just looks pristine, shiny, and feels very smooth and comfy. The Orangewood and the Harley Benton use a matte finish, which isn't bad, but it doesn't have the same appeal if you ask me. It's all preference, by the way. These tuners all do their job, thank God, but those on the Harley Benton are a little less tactile or responsive as the other 3. So it's not a problem getting it in tune, but it just feels a little bit less solid overall. inlays and decorations are a little underwhelming on the Fender. The dots on the fretboard are weirdly small, which leaves me with a rather unsatisfying feeling. Also, they are so small that I can imagine it's difficult to make a nice clean hole to put these in. Which you can clearly see, it's a little rough around the edges. The Yamaha also has its quirks. Some parts aren't really finished by the looks of it, or just not given too much attention, and weirdly enough, some frets are a little bit too short higher on the neck. The Harley Benton and the Orangewood are tied at number 1, both looking pristine and carefully put together with a good eye to detail. But if I have to pick a winner, I'd say it goes to the Orangewood because of the rosette. I personally do not like the rosette on the Harley Benton, and whoever designed that bridge probably did it at a Friday night after they had a few too many. Ooh, that's not good. And lastly, let's comment on the tone, because that's always number 1 in my book. When playing these for the first time, I couldn't help but be a little bit disappointed. They sounded a bit dull, flat and empty, not as projecting as I would have expected. But then I realized that in my head I was comparing them to my Martin D42, which I know it's totally not fair. The money to value ratio is pretty impressive on these guitars. But there are differences. Pretty big difference actually, I didn't expect. So the Yamaha and this Fender sound most alike, where the Yamaha sounds just a little bit more open and fuller than the Fender. Fender may be a little more balanced all around, but it has a little less sparkle. The Fender is also the heaviest out of the 4, so maybe that's why it has a hard time resonating properly. Maybe it opens up a little bit when it's played in, probably even, but that goes for all 4 guitars. The Yamaha is the most in the middle. It's not spectacular, it's not bad, it sounds very much how it looks, almost a bit modest. So now to the Harley Benton. This guitar surprised me. It's more vivid, it's more responsive and louder than the other 3. Some might think louder is always better, which isn't true, but in this case I think it is. The sound isn't as restrained as the other 3. Could it be because this one has a solid top? I actually do think so. Maybe the glue in between the layers just restricts it from vibrating, sort of restraining the sound from ever coming out of the sound chamber. The Orangewood is definitely interesting. It may have the nicest balance overall, but also sounds a little bit boring. It never particularly amazes me, nor does it ever disappoint me, which I guess is something a lot of folks are after. Just a reliable guitar without any fuss. Also with the body being a bit less deep and the smaller waist. Oh, and the cutaway of course. It is impressive that it can keep up with the dreadnoughts over there. Overall, it looks pretty cool, so this could be a very interesting guitar for a lot of folks. So there you have it, neither of these are bad, and I'm genuinely surprised by the value you get for the amount of money you pay. All 4 can be the perfect beginner guitar, neither of these will give you any excuses not to practice, and hopefully these guitars will inspire at least a handful of next generation musicians to come. Thanks all so much for watching, and have a lovely day. Catch you guys in the next video. Cheers! So in a few minutes, this music teacher is gonna pick up 2 of these guitars, which I'm giving away, but there she is. But as a joke, I'm gonna hang the Martin D42 on the wall as well and see which one she picks. Hey, je mag kiezen welke je wil. Het zijn er 5, zie je? 5?
Ja, deze.
Ja?
Deze. Deze mooi.
Ja.
En die.
Die 2?
Ja, die 2.
Niet deze?
Nee, ja, als je die graag wil geven dan...
Nee, niet per se. Ja?
Dankjewel. Dankjewel. Ja, voor mijn leerlingen. Ja, voor mijn school.
Maar dat zijn deze van Gerben.
Dank je.